The world was left stunned when reports broke that Donald Trump had ordered a United States Navy destroyer to approach Venezuelan waters. A U.S. destroyer, a symbol of raw American power, suddenly connected not to freedom or democracy, but to the comfort of Nicolás Maduro's regime and its cartel allies. For many, it was unthinkable. For some, it was betrayal. And for others, it was a clue that something much bigger was happening behind the curtain of global politics. Why would Trump, a man who once labeled Maduro a dictator, suddenly be seen as sending one of America's most fearsome ships into waters that seemed to shield him? Why would a destroyer meant to project U.S. dominance appear instead as a guardian for cartels, drug lords, and the very regime Washington had spent years trying to crush? The questions spread faster than wildfire. Analysts debated, conspiracy theorists rejoiced, and ordinary people across the world sat back and asked themselves, what game is really being played here? At first glance, the move made no sense. A U.S. destroyer is not a tool of kindness. It is a weapon of intimidation. It carries the weight of missiles, cannons, and advanced radar systems designed to fight wars, not to offer comfort. Yet here it was, linked to the survival of a government that thrives in the shadows of corruption, oil smuggling, and cartel alliances. Some wondered, had Trump struck a secret deal with Maduro? Had the cartels found leverage over Washington itself? Or was this entire act part of a much deeper chessboard that none of us were meant to see? For years, the world has watched Venezuela spiral into crisis. Nicolás Maduro's regime has clung to power despite international sanctions, economic collapse, and mass exodus of its people. Behind the palace walls of Caracas, whispers of cartel protection and illicit gold deals painted a dark picture of how the regime truly survives. The United States under Trump had once vowed to squeeze Maduro until he fell. But now, instead of pressure, came what looked like protection. Instead of isolation, came an unexpected embrace. And just as the world tried to make sense of it all, across the ocean, on the African continent, a young leader was watching very carefully. Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, the soldier-turned-revolutionary who has risen to global fame for defying Western powers, saw the move not as a random blunder, but as a revelation. For Traoré, the destroyer sent to Venezuela was not just about Latin America. It was about exposing the truth of how global power really works. In his eyes, the destroyer was proof that the same West that preached morality, that claimed to fight drugs and corruption, would in fact protect cartels and dictators if it served their deeper interests. And Traoré, a man who had already expelled French forces, broken ties with colonial systems, and called for African unity, was not about to let that revelation pass without response. He rose before his people and spoke words that ignited fire across the continent. He declared that when America could send its warships to comfort cartels, it proved once and for all that their so-called wars on crime were nothing more than illusions. He reminded Africans that for centuries the West had used double standards, preaching democracy while backing dictators, speaking of human rights while stealing resources, condemning corruption while profiting from it. And then he asked the question that shook not only Burkina Faso, but millions beyond. If America could use its navy to shield its interests in Latin America, why couldn't Africa build its own defenses to shield its people, its gold, its oil, its resources? Why should Africa remain naked before the oceans, while others rule the seas and dictate the rules? It was in that moment that Traoré unveiled a vision no one had expected from the landlocked heart of West Africa. He called for a new wave of cooperation among African nations, not just on land, not just through armies and borders, but across the seas. He called for a Pan-African Maritime Defense Initiative, a dream that would one day give Africa its own naval strength. The announcement sent shockwaves. Some laughed. How could a young leader from a landlocked country speak of ships and oceans? But others understood. Traoré was planting a seed. He was telling Africa that the future would not be dictated by outsiders forever. That the same way Burkina Faso had thrown off colonial chains, Africa could rise together to protect itself on every front. And while skeptics mocked, whispers began to rise. Could coastal nations like Guinea, Senegal, Ghana, and Angola actually unite under such a vision? Could powers like Mali and Niger, already allied with Traoré in the Sahel, joined forces with the Atlantic coast to create a shield against piracy, exploitation, and foreign interference. Could Africa, after centuries of being dominated by foreign navies, finally chart its own course on the seas? As the idea spread, so too did pride. Young Africans lit up social media with support. Memes turned into movements. Hashtags celebrated the vision of an Africa that could not only defend its deserts and forests, but also command its waters. Some even began to call Traoré the Lion of Africa, a symbol of courage for daring to dream where others stayed silent. Meanwhile, in Washington, the mood shifted. Suddenly, what had begun as a simple naval move in the Caribbean was now echoing across Africa as a rallying cry. Trump's destroyer, intended to show strength, had inadvertently sparked a new fire of resistance thousands of miles away. Caracas, too, was caught off guard. Maduro's regime, once comforted by the shadow of the American warship, now saw its own role exposed as part of a larger global hypocrisy. For years, they had thrived in darkness, but now, because of one bold African leader, their secrets were being discussed not just in Latin America, but in Africa, Asia, and Europe. The story grew bigger than anyone could have imagined. What began as a question of Trump and a destroyer became a story of Africa rising, of cartels exposed, of hypocrisy unveiled. And at the center of it all stood Ibrahim Traoré, calm, determined, unafraid to speak what others dared not say. As weeks passed, the effects multiplied. Analysts admitted that for the first time in decades, Africa was no longer simply reacting to world events. It was shaping them. The speeches of a young Burkina captain were now being quoted in universities, debated in parliaments, and feared in boardrooms. The destroyer had been meant to send one message, but in the end, it sent another, that the world was changing, and that the global South was finding its voice. And so the question remains, what comes next? If Trump could comfort Maduro today, who will Washington protect tomorrow? If cartels can be shielded by warships, what does that mean for justice, democracy, and the people? And most importantly, if Traoré's vision of a united Africa at sea becomes reality, what will the balance of power look like in a world that has always assumed Africa should stay weak? For the people of Burkina Faso and for millions across Africa, the answer is clear. They see in Traoré not just a leader, but a symbol, a man who dares to look at a U.S. destroyer and say, if they can do it for cartels, then we can do it for our children. A man who dares to take the hypocrisy of the West and turn it into a rallying cry for freedom. And for those in the West who still underestimate him, the message is simple: the world has changed. Africa will not be silent. The youth will not be fooled. The seas will not remain unguarded. Donald Trump's destroyer may have been sent to comfort Maduro's cartels, but in the end, it awakened a movement led by Ibrahim Traoré, a movement that may one day stand as the greatest shock of all, that Africa, once broken by colonial powers, rose again to command its destiny. So I ask you, the viewer, what do you think this all means? Was Trump playing a deeper game, or was this a betrayal of his own words? Did Maduro win, or did he just expose himself further? And most of all, is Traoré right? Should Africa rise, not just on land, but on the seas, to finally stand equal on the world stage? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let your voice be heard, because the conversation does not end here. This is history unfolding before our eyes, and your perspective matters. Don't forget to smash that like button if you believe Africa deserves strength. Share this video if you believe the truth must spread, and subscribe to this channel if you're ready to keep uncovering the stories they never wanted you to hear. Because here, we are not just telling news. We are revealing the hidden battles, the unspoken truths, and the mysterious moves that shape our world. And trust me when I say the story of Trump's destroyer, Maduro's cartels, and Traoré's bold answer is just the beginning. The world is watching, Africa is rising, and the next chapter will shock us all.